The note was offensively simple. Just 5 words scribbled on a piece of our expensive, cream-colored stationery. The kind we bought in Italy on our 2nd anniversary. The kind with our initials embossed in gold at the top. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. Below it was his signature, Caleb, a flamboyant loop that I used to think was charming. Now, it just looked like a snake. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air in our perfectly curated, minimalist living room suddenly felt thick and heavy, like I was trying to breathe underwater. My gaze drifted from the note on the marble countertop to the framed photos on the wall. Us in Santorini squinting in the brilliant sun. Us laughing at a black tie gala, my head thrown back, his arm securely around my waist. Us on our wedding day looking so impossibly young and certain it was all a lie. Every single curated moment a lie. My name is Tara Harper, or at least it was. For the last 5 years, I've been Tara Whittaker. And for every single one of those 1,800 days, I had believed I was the luckiest woman alive. Caleb was perfect. He was a charismatic venture capitalist, always jetting off to secure some new, brilliant deal. He was handsome, attentive, and remembered things like the name of my childhood dog and how I took my coffee. Black with 1.5 sugars, never 2. He was the man who held me all night when my dad passed away, the one who convinced me to quit my stable but soul-crushing job at a massive accounting firm and start my own forensic accounting consultancy. He'd said, "Tara, you're too brilliant to be just another cog in the machine. Go build your own machine." And I did. With his encouragement, I had built a successful little business from our spare bedroom, untangling the complicated financial webs of messy divorces and corporate fraud. I was good at it. I could look at a spreadsheet and see a story, find the single thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire tapestry of deceit. It was a skill I'd honed out of necessity, a defense mechanism forged in the fires of my childhood. When I was 12, my mom, a kind, trusting elementary school teacher, lost everything. Our house, her retirement, my college fund, all of it vanished into the pockets of a smooth, talking con man named Mr. Abernathy. He'd promised her a once-in-a-lifetime investment in a beachfront property development. He had brochures, blueprints, even fake testimonials. I remember him sitting at our kitchen table, sipping my mom's sweet tea, telling her she deserved to be taken care of. A week after she transferred her life savings, he was gone. The phone number was disconnected, the office address was a P.O. box, and Mr. Abernathy never existed. I watched my mother crumble. The vibrant, laughing woman who filled our home with the smell of baked bread was replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost who worked 2 jobs and still barely kept us afloat. She never recovered, not really. The financial ruin was one thing, but the shame, the feeling of being so thoroughly fooled, was what truly broke her. That was the day I made a silent vow. I would never be a victim. I would be the one who saw the lies. I would learn to read the numbers because numbers, unlike people, could not lie. And now, standing in my own kitchen, holding a note from my own personal Mr. Abernathy, I felt the ghost of that 12-year-old girl rise up inside me. The initial shock, the wave of grief that threatened to pull me under, began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar rage. He thought he could just walk away. After everything, he thought he could break me like he broke my mother. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. He had seen my strength, my intelligence, my success, but he had mistaken it for something he could exploit, a resource to be drained. He had forgotten one crucial detail. He hadn't just married a successful consultant. He had married a forensic accountant. And I was about to conduct the audit of his life. My first move wasn't to cry or call my friends. It was to go to my office. I sat down in my leather chair, the one he'd bought me as a congratulations on your first big client gift, and I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. First things first, assess the damage. I tried to log into our joint savings account. Invalid password. I tried again. Same result. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I clicked the forgot password link. The recovery email wasn't mine. It was an address I'd never seen before, a generic string of letters and numbers. He'd locked me out. Okay, plan B. I logged into my personal checking account, the one my business revenue flowed into before I transferred our share of the profits to the joint account. It was nearly empty. I scrolled through the transaction history, transfer after transfer, all to the joint savings account, all initiated in the last 48 hours. The last one was just 3 hours ago for 12,500. He'd systematically drained me. Then I checked the joint credit card, maxed out. A NAR 10,000 charge at a high-end watch store in the city. A one-way first-class plane ticket to the Cayman Islands, departing that evening. And a series of smaller, more insulting charges, a fancy dinner for two at a restaurant he knew I hated, a bouquet of flowers sent to an address I didn't recognize, a hotel room for the previous night. He hadn't just left. He'd had a party on my dime on his way out. The full scale of it started to hit me. This wasn't a spur of the moment decision. This was planned meticulously. He had been playing a long game, and I, the woman who could spot a phantom invoice from a mile away, had been completely blind. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. I felt my mother's ghost at my shoulder, whispering, "See, it can happen to anyone." "No," I whispered back to the empty room. "It happened to you. It will not happen to me." That's when I remembered. The server. About a year ago, Caleb had complained about our Wi-Fi speed and insisted on upgrading our home network. He'd bought a new router and a small black box and network, attached storage or NAS drive. He'd said it was to back up our photos and files automatically. I, being reasonably tech savvy, had helped him set it up. I had the admin password. It was the name of my childhood dog. He so thoughtfully remembered, but I wondered 23. While he had been meticulous about changing the bank and email passwords, I was betting he'd forgotten about the little black box humming quietly in the study closet. With a sense of desperate hope, I navigated to the network drive. I logged in. Access granted. My breath hitched. And there it was. It was a complete mirrored backup of his laptop, updated automatically every night at 3 a.m. The most recent backup was from just a few hours ago. He must have used his laptop to make the final transfers before wiping it and leaving. But he hadn't wiped the backup. It was the kind of sloppy, arrogant mistake a man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room would make. I started digging. It was all there. A folder named Contingencies was my first stop. Inside, I found scanned copies of fake IDs. A driver's license with his picture, but the name, Daniel Cross. A passport for a Michael Thorne. Birth certificates, social security cards. A complete portfolio of manufactured identities. My husband, Caleb Woodacre, was a ghost. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a cheating husband leaving his wife. This was a professional con artist. My marriage hadn't just ended. It had never been real in the first place. I spent the next few hours in a feverish trance, downloading everything from the NAS drive onto 3 separate encrypted hard drives. I found hidden email accounts, spreadsheets detailing financial transactions I knew nothing about, and a folder of photos. Photos of him with other women. Not just one. Dozens. In different cities at different times. In some, he looked younger with different hairstyles, different clothes. He was a chameleon. With each woman, he was smiling that same charming smile, the one that had made me believe he was my soulmate. Then I found the financials. He had a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations. It was amateurish in a way, the kind of setup designed to fool a layman, not a professional. He used common layering techniques, bouncing money between accounts in different jurisdictions to obscure its origin. It was like watching a child try to hide a cookie behind his back. I could trace it. It would take time, but I could unravel every single thread. One name kept popping up in his emails and financial records, Leah Bennett. There were transfers to her, mentions of a Savannah project, and then a series of increasingly angry emails from her demanding to know where her money was. A quick search of the Georgia State Bar Association directory gave me my answer. Leah Bennett was an attorney in Savannah, an attorney who, it seemed, had also been one of Caleb's victims. Before I did anything else, I made 2 calls. The first was to my colleague, Clara. Clara was a data security expert, a white hat hacker I occasionally contracted for my consultancy. She was brilliant, paranoid, and trusted no one, which made her the perfect person to trust right now. Clara, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I have a situation. I need you to create a digital fortress for me. New email, new cloud storage, everything completely firewalled and untraceable. And I need you to do a deep dive on a few names for me, anonymously. Give me an hour, she said, no questions asked. That was Clara. The second call was to my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the toughest, most ruthless divorce attorney in the state, a woman known as the Shark. Helen, it's Tara Whittaker. I need to file for divorce. And I need to freeze every asset my husband has ever touched. I'm sending you an encrypted file. You're not going to believe what I found. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the digital wreckage of my marriage. The grief was still there, a dull atch in my chest. But the rage had been refined. It was no longer a wildfire, it was a laser beam. Cold, precise, and ready to burn through everything. Caleb thought he had taken everything from me. He was wrong. He'd left me with 2 things: a lifetime of forensic accounting skills and a reason to use them. The game was on. The next few days were a blur of caffeine and cryptography. Clara worked her magic, setting up a secure, anonymous digital ecosystem for me. We communicated through an encrypted messaging app, our digital safe house. I sent her the names from Caleb's files. Daniel Cross, Michael Thorne, and the real prize, Caleb Whittaker, which I was now certain was also an alias. He's a ghost. Clara messaged back a day later. The Caleb Whittaker identity seems to have been created about 6 years ago. Before that, nothing. Social Security number issued in Delaware, a state known for its lax identity verification. College degree from a university that doesn't exist. The man you married was born on paper 6 months before you met him. The words hit me harder than I expected. It was one thing to know it intellectually, another to see it spelled out in black and white. I had shared a bed with a work of fiction. Meanwhile, I worked on the finances. I spent hours on the phone with fraud departments, banks, and credit card companies. I filed police reports. The initial response was always the same, a sympathetic but dismissive tone, classifying it as a domestic dispute. They didn't understand. This wasn't a husband running off with the savings. This was a calculated professional operation. You need more proof. Helen, my lawyer, told me over the phone. Right now, it's your word against his, and he's disappeared. To get a judge to issue a worldwide asset freeze, We need to prove a pattern of criminal activity. We need another victim. We needed Leah Bennett. Finding her wasn't hard. Tracing the breadcrumbs in Caleb's files, I discovered he'd used the same playbook on her as he had on me, but with a twist. He'd posed as a fellow investor in a commercial real estate deal in Savannah. He'd convinced her to put her own money into a joint escrow account he controlled, promising to match her funds. Of course, he never did. He just drained the account and vanished. The challenge was approaching her. She was a lawyer. She would be wary, defensive, and likely humiliated. I couldn't just call and say, our con, man-husband scammed us both. So I did what I do best. I gathered evidence. I compiled a simple, clear file. A side-by-side comparison of the wire transfers from my account and hers, showing they went to the same offshore shell corporation. A photo of me with Caleb and a photo I'd found in his files of him with her. Different name, same man. I put it all into a password-protected PDF. I sent her an email from my new anonymous account. The subject line was just the name of the shell corporation, Viridian Holdings LLC GA. The body of the email was short. Ms. Bennett, I believe we have a mutual acquaintance who has caused us both significant financial and personal distress. I have information that could be vital to recovering your assets and ensuring he does not do this to anyone else. The password for the attached file is Savannah. I am not your enemy. Sincerely, a fellow victim. I hit send and held my breath. For the next 2 hours, I paced my office, checking my inbox every 30 seconds. Nothing. I started to despair. Maybe she thought it was a trick. Maybe she had moved on. Maybe she was too proud to admit she'd been fooled. Then the notification pinged. A reply. Who is this? How did you get this information? I'm in Atlanta for the next 2 days. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. The coffee shop in the lobby of the Omni Hotel. Come alone. The relief was so intense it made me dizzy. I had a meeting. I had an ally. The next day, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress and low heels. I wanted to look professional, stable, and sane, not like a woman whose life had just been detonated. I drove to Atlanta, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and adrenaline. I spotted her immediately. She was sitting at a small table in the corner, nursing a cup of tea. She was tall, poised, with sharp, intelligent eyes that scanned the room with a lawyer's practiced vigilance. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who would never, ever be conned, which, of course, was the point. Caleb didn't target the weak. He targeted the strong. It was a bigger prize, a greater challenge. I walked over. Leah. She looked up, her expression unreadable. You must be the email. I sat down. My name is Tara. We sat in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by a ghost. She spoke first, her voice low and controlled. The man in your file. The man you call Caleb. I knew him as Daniel Cross. He told me he was a developer from Charleston. We were together for a year. He disappeared 6 months ago with almost $200,000 of my money. There was no emotion in her voice, just a flat recitation of facts. He told me he was a venture capitalist. I replied, my own voice equally measured. We were married for 5 years. He disappeared 4 days ago with everything. Well over $500,000. Her composure cracked for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened slightly. 5 years. The words hung in the air between us. My scam was so much deeper, so much more intimate than hers. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. This is just the beginning, I said, pushing it across the table. He has at least 3 other active aliases that I know of. He's been doing this for at least a decade. The man we knew doesn't exist. For the next hour, we talked. The initial tension and suspicion melted away. replaced by a grim sense of camaraderie. We compared notes, timelines, the lies he'd told. The stories were sickeningly similar. He'd mirrored our interests, our ambitions, our deepest desires. For Leia, an ambitious lawyer, he was a savvy business partner. For me, a woman who craved stability after a chaotic childhood, he was a devoted, reliable husband. He had built a personality for each of us. He told me his parents died in a car crash when he was in college, Leia said, staring into her cold tea. I meant, too, I whispered. He said he had a sister in Oregon, a nurse, but they were estranged. Leia shook her head. He told me he was an only child. We were piecing together a monster. By the end of our meeting, we had a plan. Leia's legal expertise, combined with my financial tracking skills, was a powerful combination. She would work the legal angles, preparing the affidavits and motions. I would continue to follow the money and build a comprehensive profile of his entire criminal enterprise. There's one more thing, I said as we were about to leave. He's in the Cayman Islands. He flew out the night he left me, but he's not going to stay there. It's a classic misdirection. He'll move the money from there to a more secure, less obvious location. My guess is Liechtenstein or Switzerland. He'll need a few days to set it up, which means he's probably feeling comfortable, arrogant, and that's when he'll get sloppy-da. So what's our move? Leia asked, her eyes glinting with a new, hard light. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first time I'd smiled in days. We're not going to wait for him to get sloppy, I said. We're going to give him a reason to. We're going to set a trap, and he's so arrogant, he'll walk right into it. The plan we devised was audacious, leaning heavily on Caleb's, or whatever his real name was. Two greatest weaknesses, his greed and his ego. We knew he monitored his old life. He would want to know if I had fallen apart, if I was a sobbing wreck, if his great escape had been a success. He would be watching. So we gave him a show. Phase 1 was a carefully orchestrated performance of a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I called his old phone number a dozen times, leaving rambling, tearful voicemails. I posted vague, heartbroken messages on social media. Leia, acting on my behalf, sent a series of frantic, sounding legal letters to his old office, which we knew were just being forwarded to one of his secret email accounts. The letters were deliberately amateurish, full of emotional pleas rather than sound legal threats. We wanted him to think I was falling apart and that my legal counsel was incompetent. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the real work was happening at a furious pace. I spent nearly 18 hours a day tracing flow of funds. It was a global game of whack-a-mole. As soon as I identified an account in the Caymans, the money would vanish, reappearing in a different shell corporation in Panama, then bouncing to Cyprus. But he was leaving a trail, faint digital breadcrumbs. Every transaction has a signature. Every shell corporation needs a registered agent. Yeah. I was finding them. Clara was my secret weapon. She was digging into his aliases, peeling back the layers of his fabricated life. She discovered something crucial. One of his fake passports, the one for Michael Thorne, had been used to enter the United States from Switzerland 3 years prior, and the entry stamp was at a small, private airport in Teterboro, New Jersey. That's odd, I told Leia over our secure line. Why Teterboro? It's for private jets. You don't just fly commercial into Teterboro. Maybe he has rich friends, Leia suggested. No, I said, a thought beginning to form. He doesn't have friends. He has targets, and he has accomplices. This changed everything. He wasn't a lone wolf. An operation this complex, running for this long, required a support network, someone to create the fake documents. someone to act as a reference, someone on the inside. That's when I remembered his sister, the estranged nurse in Oregon. He'd mentioned her name once, years ago, in passing, Maeve. He'd shown me a blurry photo of her once. I had barely paid attention. But now, I wondered, was Maeve real? Clara got to work. There was no Maeve Whittaker. There was no Maeve Cross or Maeve Thorne. But there was a Maeve Caldwell who had a history of petty crimes, including check fraud and forgery, based out of New Jersey. And her mugshot, though 10 years old, was a dead ringer for the blurry photo Caleb had shown me. We had found his accomplice. And even better, we had found his real last name, Caldwell. Clara's fingers flew across her keyboard. Nathan Caldwell. A long rap sheet. He'd done a 3-year stint in a federal prison in Pennsylvania for wire fraud. He was released 6.5 years ago. 6 months before I met Caleb Whittaker, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Nathan Caldwell wasn't just a con man. He was an ex-con, and he was part of something bigger. Now it was time for phase 2 of our plan, the bait. I used my own consultancy as the stage. I let it be known through industry contacts that I had landed a massive new client, a reclusive tech billionaire who needed a complete forensic audit of his vast international holdings. I made sure to drop hints about the scale of the deal, suggesting the commission would be in the 7 figures. It was a lie, of course, but it was a plausible one. Then I made a very public, very large transfer of $250,000 from my business account to a new escrow account, an account I set up specifically for this purpose. It was all the liquid cash I had left, a huge risk, but it was necessary. We needed the bait to be irresistible. Leah then sent one final, official, looking letter to Nathan's old lawyer. The letter stated that I, Tara, had come into a significant, non-marital financial windfall. It went on to propose a ridiculously low settlement for the divorce, a mere $50,000, in exchange for a quick, clean break. The implication was clear. I was a desperate woman, sitting on a pile of new money that I was terrified he would get his hands on in a lengthy divorce proceeding. I just wanted him gone. We were betting that his greed would overcome his caution. The thought of me, his victim, suddenly having access to a fortune while he was living off the money he'd stolen from me and Leah would be galling to him. And the offer of a paltry $50,000 settlement would feel like an insult. He wouldn't just want the money he stole, he'd want the new money too. He'd want it all. The hook was set. Now, we just had to wait for the fish to bite. We didn't have to wait long. A week later, I got an email. It was from him, from a new anonymous account. Tara, I hear you've come into some money. Congratulations. Perhaps your ridiculous settlement offer should be reconsidered. I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to discuss this in person. Let's be civilized. There's a quiet cafe in Georgetown, La Colombe, Friday, 3 p.m. We can sign the papers and go our separate ways. Caleb, my hands trembled as I read it. He was coming back. He was actually walking back into the country. His arrogance was breathtaking. He thought he was in complete control. He thought he was coming to intimidate his broken, hearted wife into giving him a fat check. What he didn't know was that Leah had already been in contact with the FBI. The agent assigned to our case, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Nora Callahan, had been skeptical at first. But the evidence we'd compiled was overwhelming: the multiple aliases, the pattern of fraud, the offshore accounts, the connection to an accomplice with a criminal record. Nathan Caldwell wasn't just a domestic issue anymore. He was a serial interstate fraudster. He's coming back. Agent Callahan had asked, a hint of admiration in her voice, when we told her the plan. You baited him and he's coming back. Okay, ladies, let's go get him. The day of the meeting felt surreal. I woke up feeling strangely calm. The fear and anger had been replaced by a singular, sharp focus. I chose my outfit like a suit of armor, a well-tailored black pantsuit, crisp white shirt. I looked powerful. I felt powerful. Laia and I met Agent Callahan and her team an hour before the meeting. The cafe was already swarming with undercover agents, a couple reading newspapers, a businessman typing on a laptop, the barista, they were all FBI. "You okay with this, Tara?" Callahan asked, her eyes searching mine. "You're the one who has to sit across from him." I took a deep breath. "I've been waiting for this day my entire life," I said. It was true. In that moment, I wasn't just doing this for me and Leia. I was doing it for my mother. I was doing it for the 12-year-old girl who swore she would never be a victim. I was wired for sound. Callahan would be in a surveillance van parked across the street, listening to every word. The plan was simple. I would get him to admit, on tape, to being Caleb Wetacre and to having taken my money. That was all they needed to make the arrest. At 3 p.m., on the dot, he walked in. He looked different, thinner, with a scruffy beard, wearing a baseball cap pulled down low. But the eyes were the same, and the confident, predatory swagger was unmistakable. He slid into the booth opposite me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Tara, you look surprisingly well." "Cut the crap, Nathan," I said. The smirk vanished. His eyes narrowed. "I don't know who that is." "Oh, I think you do," I said, leaning forward. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of his prison release form. His real name, Nathan Caldwell, typed clearly at the top. He glanced at it, then back at me. The mask of charm was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. "You've been busy." "You have no idea," I said. "I know about Leia Bennett in Savannah. I know about the woman in Denver you scammed out of her inheritance. I know about Maeve, your sister, and her forgery business in Jersey. I know everything." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He had underestimated me completely. "What do you want?" He hissed. "It's not about what I want anymore," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength I didn't know I possessed. "You see, you built your entire life on the assumption that your victims would be too broken, too ashamed to fight back. You were counting on my mother's silence. But you made one mistake. You chose me." He started to stand up, a look of panic on his face. "This is a setup." "It's not a setup, Nathan," I said, looking past him towards the door. "It's an audit." On cue, Agent Callahan and 2 other agents stepped into the cafe, their badges displayed. The fake patrons stood up, their hands on their weapons. "Nathan Caldwell," Callahan said, her voice booming in the suddenly silent cafe. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." His face, when they snapped the handcuffs on him, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The master manipulator, the man who was always 10 steps ahead, had been completely and utterly outplayed. As they led him past my table, his eyes met mine. They were filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. I just smiled, took a sip of my water, and said, "Goodbye. Never loved you anyway." The arrest was only the beginning. With Nathan in custody, the real work of dismantling his network began. The FBI, led by Agent Callahan, was relentless. But Nathan was a professional. He kept his mouth shut, confident that the web he'd woven was too complex, the money too well hidden, for them to ever untangle. That's where I came in. The FBI officially brought me on as a consultant for the case. I spent my days in a sterile government office with Callahan and her team, poring over the mountains of data we'd recovered. It turned out Nathan's enterprise was far bigger than I had ever imagined. He wasn't just a serial con artist who scammed women. That was just his side hustle. His main business was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme targeting wealthy retirees. He had stolen tens of millions of dollars. My life with him, I realized, had been the final phase of his master plan. He was going to use my reputation as a forensic accountant. He'd planned to introduce me to his high net worth clients, using my legitimate business as a respectable front to lure them into his scheme. My credibility would have been the final, convincing piece of his puzzle. He hadn't just married me for my money, he'd married me for my name. Leia became an indispensable part of the team. She flew up from Savannah and worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office, helping to build the legal case and coordinate with Nathan's other victims, who were now starting to emerge from the woodwork. We found women and men all over the country, each with a story of a charming stranger who had won their trust and then vanished with their life savings. But as the case against him grew stronger, Nathan grew more desperate. He might be behind bars, but he wasn't powerless. He still had one move left to play: intimidation. It started subtly. A hang-up call in the middle of the night. The feeling of being watched as I walked to my car. Then, one morning, I found a dead bird on my doorstep. It was a clear, chilling message. Callahan offered me protection, but I refused. No, I told her. If he thinks he can scare me off, he's wrong. This is exactly what he wants. We need to use this. I knew he couldn't be acting alone. He was in a federal holding facility. He had to be communicating with someone on the outside. Maeve, his accomplice sister, was still in the wind. And Clara's research had turned up another name from Nathan's prison records: Elliot Kane. A former cellmate, a career thug with a long history of assault and witness intimidation. My home, once a symbol of Nathan's lies, was about to become my fortress. And my trap, working with Clara and the FBI's technical team, we turned my house into a surveillance hub. We installed pinhole cameras in every room, microphones in the walls, pressure sensors under the rugs. My home was a giant mousetrap, and we were just waiting for the rats to show up. The first one to take the bait was Elliot Kane. He showed up one evening, disguised as a pizza delivery guy. I watched him on the hidden camera feed from the kitchen as he walked up my driveway. He wasn't carrying a pizza box. His right hand was shoved deep into his jacket pocket. I opened the door before he could knock, a warm, disarming smile on my face. "I didn't order a pizza," I said cheerfully. He was momentarily thrown. "Yeah, 124 Oak Street. This is 126, I said, still smiling. "You must be lost." He grunted, trying to peer past me into the house. "Right? Sorry." As he turned to leave, his hand came out of his pocket, and I saw the glint of a knife. He was just trying to get a look at the layout to see if I was alone. "Hey," I called after him. He turned back. "Drive safe," I said. The look on his face was a mixture of confusion and frustration. He knew something was off, but he couldn't figure out what. He got back in his car and drove away. 2 blocks down, an unmarked car pulled him over for a broken taillight. The knife was a parole violation. Elliot Kane was off the board. Now, it was Maeve's turn. We knew she was the one with the technical skills, the forger. Nathan needed her to try and access his hidden accounts before the feds could find them. And he must have told her that the key, passwords, account numbers, routing keys, was likely on my personal computer in my home office. So we gave her a reason to break in. I made a public show of leaving town for the weekend. I packed a suitcase, told my neighbors I was visiting family, and had a friend pick me up. But instead of going to the airport, I went to the FBI surveillance van parked a street away. With Callahan and her team, I sat and watched the camera feeds of my empty house. We waited for 2 days. Nothing. I was starting to think she wouldn't show. Then, on the second night, just after 2 a.m., a dark figure slipped out of the woods behind my house. It was Maeve. She expertly jimmied a back window and slid inside. We watched, spellbound, as she moved through my house. She was wearing gloves, a mask, and she moved with a quiet confidence. She went straight to my office. She ignored my laptop and went right for the hard drive tower, just as we'd predicted. But the hard drive she was trying to access was a dummy. The real one was locked in an FBI evidence locker. This one was a decoy set up by Clara. The moment Maeve plugged her USB drive into it to try and bypass the password, it triggered a silent alarm and initiated a program that instantly copied the entire contents of her drive. What got her? Clara whispered from the seat next to me in the van. On her screen, files were streaming in. Ledgers, bank statements, names of other accomplices. The entire administrative backend of Nathan's Ponzi scheme. Okay, team, let's go, Callahan said into her radio. I watched on the monitor as the FBI tactical team swarmed the house. Maeve didn't even have time to react. One moment, she was in my office, thinking she was winning. The next, she was on the floor, surrounded, her game over. The trial was a spectacle. The evidence was so overwhelming that Nathan's high-priced lawyer could do little more than throw legal Hail Marys. But with Maeve and Elliot turning on him in exchange for lighter sentences and a parade of victims, including me and Leia, taking the stand to tell our stories, the outcome was never in doubt. I'll never forget the moment the verdict was read. Guilty. On all counts. Nathan stood there, motionless. He looked at me, his face a blank mask. The charm, the anger, the hatred, it was all gone. There was nothing left. He was just a hollow man, a ghost in a tailored suit. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. After it was all over, Leia and I stood on the courthouse steps, blinking in the bright sunlight. We were surrounded by other victims, people who had lost everything to Nathan Caldwell. But they weren't crying. They were smiling. They were hugging each other. There was a sense of profound collective relief. So, what now? Leia asked me. I thought about it for a moment. I could go back to my old life, to my consultancy, to auditing the rich and their petty squabbles. But something inside me had changed. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, not just unscathed, but forged into something stronger. I legally changed my name back to Tara Harper. I sold the house, that beautiful, minimalist prison filled with ghosts and lies. I started over. But I didn't do it alone. Leia and I decided to combine our powers for good. She moved her practice, and we opened a small non-profit firm together. She provides the legal counsel, and I provide the forensic accounting. We help victims of complex financial fraud, people like my mother, people like us, navigate the system, track down their money, and get the justice they deserve. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm tracing a new web of deceit, I think about Nathan. I think about the 5 years I lost, the trust I gave to a phantom. The anger is gone, and so is the grief. All that's left is a quiet, steely resolve. He meant to destroy me. He meant to leave me as a broken victim, another sad story. But instead, he gave me a purpose. He introduced me to my best friend and business partner. He taught me just how strong I could be. He thought he was writing the end of my story. He had no idea he was just writing the beginning.